The first official topic in AP World History Modern begins around 1200 CE with the most powerful empire in the world at the time, China. Today, we're going to study the Song Dynasty of China and how they got along with their other neighbors in East Asia. At this point, Chinese civilization occupies about half of what China looks like today in the 21st century and has trade relationships with its neighbors, Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. It was easily the largest power in the region and contained some of the largest cities in the world at this point in history. For your AP test, here are 3 things about the Song Dynasty you should be able to explain. What Chinese cultural traditions influenced the region of East Asia? How did the Song Dynasty's government maintain and justify their political power? How did commercial innovations in the Song Dynasty generate a strong economy? One of the best places to start with understanding China is by understanding all of its cultural traditions. These 3 religions or philosophies are the cornerstones of Chinese culture in the period: Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Confucianism and Taoism are indigenous to China, but Buddhism moved into the region and, along with being popular on its own, created syncretic religions like Neo-Confucianism. Understanding how these religions intersected in China is the first step to understanding the Song Dynasty. Probably the most important of all, though, was Confucianism. The tenets of Confucianism dictated both the cultural norms and the political power in the Song Dynasty. Let me explain. Culturally, the idea of filial piety in Confucianism dictated a respect and deference to one's elders, and particular emphasis towards men. Confucianism also prioritized etiquette, good moral behavior, and contributing to one's community. And one of the best ways to contribute to your community? Government service. China's government was large, centralized, and controlled by an extensive bureaucracy. It established order, and through this order, the Song Dynasty was able to maintain political power in China. This centralized bureaucratic style of government will be a continuity for China in subsequent dynasties. So far, we've established 2 things that are true about China. Number 1, Confucianism created the cultural norms in society. And number 2, the Chinese government was a centralized bureaucracy. Now, see where these 2 ideas come together. The way for someone to get a job and serve in this large government was by passing the civil service exam. People would study for years to take this exam. Imagine your entire career depends on one test. No pressure. And surprise, the main focus of the test is Confucianism. Only people who are well versed in Confucianism could serve in China's government. This is where we really see our answer to our second question. Confucianism was the root of China's power. It's important to see this connection between political power and cultural influence in Unit 1. Civilizations will use religion as a unifying force to solidify political power. So China has this large centralized government that shares the same cultural values of the rest of the civilization. But looking beyond China for a moment, how does China get along with its neighbors in the region? Civilizations nearby were largely intimidated by how powerful China was. Another way China maintained its power was by exerting its political and cultural influence over neighboring societies. China set the rules of the neighborhood, and everyone else had to decide how closely they wanted to play along. Let's look at 3 of these neighbors of China: Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. Despite being conquered previously by China, Korea had maintained its political independence and sought to replicate China's administrative techniques. Culturally, Confucianism spread and became more popular in Korea. While the exam system did not catch on, Korea had been forced to provide China with regular tribute in order to stay in China's good graces. China's attitude was basically, look, you can be independent, but you have to send me gifts, or else. This was a political strategy that China would execute with multiple civilizations in order to maintain political power. Other civilizations will use a similar tactic later in the course, so keep an eye out for that. On a scale of 1 to 10, we're going to say Korea was influenced by China at about a 6, due to being partially conquered, required to pay tribute, and spread their cultural influence there. Meanwhile, in Vietnam adopted all sorts of things from China: government styles, the exam system, art and literature, all while submitting tribute and to Chinese rule for generations. Maybe their largest contribution to China was providing access to champa rice, which is largely responsible for China's population boom. It might not sound all that exciting, but champa rice was responsible for feeding millions of people over the coming years. China expected Vietnam to fully assimilate politically and culturally, and for that, we'll give them a 9 out of 10 on the influence scale. Lastly, Japan. Japan was different than Korea and Vietnam because it is notably not connected to China via land. This 100-mile gap of water between them allowed Japan to be more selective in what they wanted to adopt from China. Turns out 100 miles of water is a great political barrier. Largely safe from a land invasion, Japan never adopted any of China's political strategies due to its already established decentralized government with the samurai. While some cultural traits like Buddhism became more popular in Japan, it never replaced Japan's indigenous belief system, Shintoism, in the country's culture. On the influence scale, we'll give Japan a 3 out of 10. While China's influence over its neighbors occurred to varying degrees, it's worth repeating that China is clearly the political and cultural power in the region. I think it's also super helpful as well for you to see what each of these smaller civilizations are up to at this point in history besides China. We'll be back to talk about them in future videos. Whether you were forced to interact with China or volunteered, besides political and cultural ideas, what other advantages did a civilization have by choosing to interact with China during the period? The big thing that we have not talked about yet was China's commercial power. China's economy was on a roll during the Song Dynasty. They were producing luxury goods like silk and porcelain that people would seek from all over the world to trade for. In addition, China's urbanization and manufacturing facilitated the construction of early iron products, which were incorporated into infrastructure like bridges and buildings that were not matched anywhere else in the world at this point. The most notable of these was the Grand Canal that allowed for quick transportation and trade throughout the entire civilization. Some of the most important inventions in Unit 1 were invented and used by China during the period, and will absolutely show up in other parts of the class. Notably, the compass, paper, and gunpowder. The Song Dynasty is the starting point of AP World History Modern, and for good reason. China is one of the main characters in the class and helps us establish a baseline for where China is at the beginning of the course. The Song Dynasty is also a civilization that we will use as a case study. Not because it was without fault, but because it symbolizes a lot of the big themes in Unit 1. Here's a quick recap. China's cultural identity was highly influenced by religions and philosophies, but primarily by Confucianism, which they used to legitimize their power. China's government was a large, complex bureaucracy that required people to pass the civil service exam to get a job. China maintained dominance in the region by politically and culturally influencing its regional neighbors of Korea, Vietnam, and Japan to varying degrees. China's economic power created a strong trade infrastructure, urbanization, and attracted people from all over the world to trade for their luxury goods. Well, that's it. That's a wrap on 1.1. Thanks for watching. Check out a free resource guide for this video in the description below. Then go ahead and dive into my other Unit 1 videos. Have a great day!